Let's look now at the example, the hotel example at the end of this chapter. So what this example is doing is it's showing it's a web page, and when they visit the web page, it creates a customized offer. And that customized offer has the name of the hotel and the discount and an expiration date. So it's a bit of an advertisement. If we look at the screen, you can see it says latest hotel offer here, and then it has the hotel name, the remain rate and the discounted rate, and the expiration date. So everything underneath this latest hotel offer is actually dynamically generated by the JavaScript. Let's go see how. Here's the HTML. Notice it looks like a standard HTML file. It's got a reference to the style sheet, which we won't look at. But then underneath that, notice that here's the label, the heading that we saw, latest hotel offer. And then underneath it, instead of the hard-coded dollar amounts and expiration dates, there are references to div elements. There are div elements, and each of those div elements is uniquely identified by an ID. And what we'll see in the JavaScript is that the JavaScript sets a value for that element by using the ID. You can see the hotel name, room rate, special rate, and the offer ends date will get set when we run the code. And then at the bottom of the screen is the connection to the JavaScript where it references the JavaScript code. So looking at the JavaScript code now, let's see what we find. So the first thing I'm going to mention is that this function call, this function definition at the very beginning and then the very last line, we're just going to completely ignore that for the moment. What I want to do as we walk through the code is show you how I look at code that I haven't seen before. How do I go about figuring out what a piece of code does? This one is a nice example because it's really nicely commented, so we can learn most of what we need to from the comments. But even so, it's well structured so that we can actually see how that's done. So when I first see a piece of code, I try to get an overview. So I read the header comment. The script is placed inside immediately. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, and I decide I'm going to ignore that because I'm going to ignore this piece right for the moment. And then I scroll down a little bit and start looking at the comments and the overall structure of the code. So part 1, create hotel object and write out the offer details. Okay, so that's what it's going to do. And then I see, okay, commented, here's where it creates the actual hotel object using the object literal syntax that we saw. And I sort of skim over that and see, okay, it's creating hotel and it's got some properties. And then I scroll down some more and it says, okay, here are some variables. Okay, I'll note that for future reference. It's doing some stuff with a hotel name, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'll come back and look at that in a little bit, but I'm just going to stay with my overview. Now I see part 2. Okay, calculate and write out the expiration details for the offer. Okay, so there's some more variables there. Aha, here's a function definition. I'm going to look at this and says, okay, so the function offer expires, and then it gives it today. So it looks like it is figuring out the expiration date when it takes as an argument, or as a parameter rather, today's date. So that sort of tells me that what I can expect this function to do. It takes today's date and it returns an expiration date. A week in the future, we happen to know. I'm not going to look at anything more inside of that function at the moment because I'm just going to take it as a given that the function does what it seems to be doing. I'm staying at my overview. And then I scroll all the way down to the bottom and I see at the very bottom, okay, it's doing a couple more things. It looks like it's getting today's date and then it's doing something with this, and then it's looks like it's setting today's date. No, it's setting the expiration date. So that's how I go about getting an overview of the code before I actually start digging in. Now I'm just going to dig into a few pieces of this and invite you to explore the rest. So as we go through, I'll scroll back up to the top. And now I'll go through in a little bit more detail. like I said, I'll do some of this and I'll invite you to do the rest. So when I start digging in the detail a little bit, I start to look at, okay, what is this hotel object that's been created? Okay, so we've got a hotel. We've got this object literal notation, which starts with the curly brace, closes with the curly brace, and has the name value pairs, the property name, and then the value laid out. So I know name is park, the basic rate is $240, the discount is 15%, and then there's this function, the offer price, which is basically the discounted amount, which is computed by this expression. And if we use what we know about evaluating expressions, we can determine that basically this function is discounting the room rate by 15%. And when you call this function, the offer price method, it returns the discounted rate. So that's what I find when I read the hotel object. Now, as I go further, as I imagine what the JavaScript interpreter or the browser is going to do as it executes each line, I see that it's declaring some variables, always a good practice. And let's look at this first hotel name, this first use of the hotel name. So what's going on here is we're using some more objects. Specifically, we're using elements from the document object model. Notice we're calling document dot using the dot notation, and then we're using the get element by ID method. So remember, what that's going to do is that's going to go and find, we'll switch back to our HTML, it's going to find the element that has the ID hotel name. And there it is. It's this div statement. Okay, so now that's going to return, this get element by ID is going to return a reference to that div element, that very piece of the HTML, and we're going to assign that reference to the variable hotel name. So now we have a way to reference that div directly from within our JavaScript. That div itself is an object. So if we scroll down a little further at line 26, you can see that we're now referencing a property of the hotel name object. We use that dot notation again. And you can see what we're doing is we're assigning a value to the hotel name dot text content. And what we're doing is we're assigning the value of the property in the hotel object. So we're working with multiple objects on this one line. So it's going to take the hotel.name, and the value of that is park, and it's going to assign that over here to the text content property of hotel name. Now, the text content, what that does is, this is a special aspect of what the DOM allows you to do, by assigning a value to that text content property, it will actually change what's shown in that part of the div, in that part of the web page. So this is actually how, from JavaScript, we are updating elements of the page dynamically. Notice it uses a couple of different, we've used some properties of the existing DOM element, and we've used some properties from our own, from the object that we created. So that's what's happening in this section of the code. We're assigning values to various elements of the web page. Now, in part 2, if we scroll, and that happens on the other page, in the other lines also. You can explore that. If we move on to look at part 2, you can see that basically that's the same thing going on. It's just that we have this function that's doing some computation. We're declaring some variables. It defines this function. And then and then it eventually calls the function. So on line 59, it gets the today's date by using the date object. Notice we called the new date to create a new date object, and we saved a reference to that in the today variable. And then we got the div for the offer ends element and put a reference to that. And then we updated the inner HTML for that HTML element, which is similar to the text content that we saw above, by whatever is returned from the offer expires function when we call that with the today object. So there's a couple of things going on here. We got the today object, we got a reference to the HTML element, and then we updated that HTML element after we called the function. So that's basically how I analyze this piece of code, with an overview first and then I dive down. In the third round, I would actually go through and analyze the function definition code. I will leave that to you as an exercise. Enjoy.